Billionaire entered his ex-wife's house in anger, but stopped when he saw her holding a newborn baby. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now sit back and enjoy every detail. The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Silas Lockwood's corner office on the 42nd floor, each drop echoing the rhythm of his restless fingers tapping against the mahogany desk. At 38, he commanded respect in every boardroom he entered. His 6'3" frame carried an authority that made venture capitalists lean forward when he spoke, and his steel-gray eyes could dissect a business plan with surgical precision. Today, those same eyes stared blankly at the quarterly reports scattered before him, his mind somewhere else entirely. 8 months. That's how long it had been since Carolina signed the divorce papers with that quiet dignity that had always unsettled him. No screaming, no dramatic gestures, just her elegant signature in blue ink, sealing the end of 5 years that had felt both eternal and impossibly brief. "Mr. Lockwood?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your 3 o'clock is here." Silas straightened his charcoal Armani tie and ran a hand through his dark brown hair, still thick despite the stress lines that had deepened around his eyes over the past year. "Send him in." David Chen, his former head of operations, walked in with the easy confidence of someone who had moved on to bigger things. The merger with Green Tech Solutions had been lucrative for both of them, and David now ran his own sustainable energy consultancy. "Silas, good to see you." David's handshake was firm, his smile genuine. "How's the transition going with the new team?" They talked business for 20 minutes. Solar panel innovations, battery storage solutions, the kind of technical discussions that usually energize Silas. But today his responses felt mechanical, automatic. His mind kept drifting to memories he'd spent months trying to bury. Carolina's laugh when she'd catch him working at 2 a.m., the way she'd leave coffee by his laptop without saying a word, how she'd curl up in the reading nook of their Tribeca loft with her camera equipment spread around her like artist's tools. "You seem distracted," David observed, leaning back in the leather chair. "Everything all right?" Silas forced a smile. "Just the usual pressures. You know how it is." Actually, speaking of catching up, David's expression shifted slightly, becoming more cautious. "I ran into someone who mentioned Carolina the other day, at that gallery opening in Soho." The name hit Silas like a physical blow, though he kept his expression neutral. He'd trained himself not to react to mentions of her, to treat their shared history like a closed business deal. "Oh?" The word came out more sharply than he intended. David hesitated, clearly debating whether to continue. "Look, I probably shouldn't say anything, but they mentioned she had a baby recently. Just a couple weeks ago, I think." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Silas felt his chest tighten, a sensation he hadn't experienced since the day she'd packed her cameras and left their apartment for the last time. His fingers gripped the edge of his desk. "A baby?" His voice sounded strange to his own ears. "Yeah, and—" David paused, looking uncomfortable. "This might sound crazy, but they said the kid looks just like you. Same eyes, apparently, dark hair. I mean, it's probably just coincidence, but—" The rest of David's words became white noise. Silas's mind was racing, calculating dates, remembering their last months together. The fights about his schedule, her increasing silences, the way she'd stopped asking him to come to bed at reasonable hours, and that final conversation about children, when she'd looked at him with hope that he'd crushed with 3 careless sentences. "Filhos não cabem em uma agenda como a minha," he'd said in Portuguese, the language he defaulted to when he was being cruel. "Children don't fit into a schedule like mine." She hadn't brought it up again. 2 months later, he'd asked for the divorce, convinced they wanted different lives, convinced she'd be better off without him. Now, sitting in his temperature-controlled office 42 floors above the chaos of Manhattan, Silas felt something crack inside his chest. If what David was saying was true, if Carolina had been pregnant when they divorced, "Silas, you look like you've seen a ghost." Silas stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward. "I have to go." "Wait, what? We haven't finished." But Silas was already grabbing his keys, his mind singular in focus. The drive to Brooklyn Heights would take 30 minutes in this traffic. 30 minutes to figure out what he was going to say to the woman he'd convinced himself he was better off forgetting. 30 minutes to prepare for the possibility that everything he thought he knew about the last 8 months of his life had been a lie. What would you do if you discovered your ex-spouse had been hiding something life-changing from you? Would anger or curiosity drive your next move? The brownstone on Remsen Street looked exactly as Silas remembered it. red brick facade with white trim, the small garden Carolina had insisted on maintaining even during their most turbulent months. His hands trembled slightly as he parked his black Tesla against the curb, the engine's silence somehow more deafening than the thunderous beating of his heart. Through the October drizzle, he could see warm light spilling from the living room windows of the ground-floor apartment they'd shared for 3 years before moving to Manhattan. She'd kept the place, he realized. Their sanctuary, where she used to develop film in the converted closet and where he'd learned to make her grandmother's Portuguese coffee on lazy Sunday mornings. Silas sat in the driver's seat for a full minute, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Anger coursed through his veins. Hot, righteous fury at being deceived, at being robbed of choices he didn't even know he'd had. But underneath the anger was something more complex, more frightening, a desperate need to know the truth. The rain had softened to a mist by the time he reached her door. His finger hovered over the familiar brass doorbell, the one that still bore the tiny dent from when they'd moved in their oversized couch. He could hear his own breathing, sharp and uneven. Instead of ringing, he knocked. 3 deliberate raps that echoed in the evening quiet. Footsteps approached, slower than he remembered, more careful. The door opened, and time seemed to suspend itself. Carolina stood before him, and for a moment Silas forgot how to breathe. She was thinner than before, her cheekbones more pronounced beneath alabaster skin that had lost some of its luminous glow. Her auburn hair, once always perfectly styled, was pulled back in a messy bun secured with what looked like a pencil. Dark circles shadowed her green eyes, those same eyes that had once looked at him like he could move mountains. She wore an oversized gray sweater that hung loosely on her frame and black leggings, her feet bare despite the October chill. There was something fragile about her appearance, but her spine remained straight, her chin lifted with that quiet strength he'd never been able to break. Silas. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried no surprise, as if she'd been expecting this moment. "We need to talk." She stepped aside without a word, and he entered the apartment that had once been their shared world. The familiar scent hit him immediately, vanilla and darkroom chemicals, the combination that had always been uniquely Carolina. But now there was something else, something new, the clean, powdery smell of baby products. The living room had been transformed. Gone was the sleek modern furniture they'd chosen together. In its place sat a comfortable navy blue sofa with soft throws draped over the arms, a wooden coffee table scattered with what looked like parenting books, and in the corner, a white bassinet with delicate mesh sides. Silas's eyes fixed on the bassinet, his breath catching in his throat. "He's sleeping," Carolina said quietly, following his gaze. "He finally went down about 20 minutes ago." "He? A son. How long have you known?" Silas's voice came out harsher than he intended, the businessman in him demanding facts before emotions could cloud his judgment. Carolina moved to the couch, settling into the corner where she'd always curled up with her editing equipment. She looked exhausted in a way that went beyond simple tiredness, the bone-deep weariness of someone carrying too much alone. "About the baby? Or about you finding out? Don't play games with me, Carolina. You know what I'm asking." She was quiet for a long moment, her hands clasped in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but soft. "I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after you asked for the divorce. The papers were already drawn up. You'd made it clear what you wanted. And you decided to just not tell me. I decided to survive." The words came out with surprising firmness. "You told me children didn't fit into your schedule, Silas. You made that abundantly clear." He began to pace, the familiar restless energy that had driven him to build an empire now turning inward, eating at him. "That's not the point. This isn't about schedules or timing. This is about honesty, about giving me a choice." "What choice?" Carolina's laugh was hollow, devoid of humor. "The choice to feel obligated? To resent us both? To fit us into your calendar between board meetings? You don't get to make those decisions for me." His voice echoed in the quiet apartment, and from the bassinet came a small, startled cry. Carolina was on her feet instantly, moving with the fluid grace of new motherhood toward the sound. Silas watched, frozen, as she lifted a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blue blanket. The baby's cry softened immediately upon contact with his mother, but Silas could see a small fist waving in the air, and when Carolina turned slightly, he caught his first clear glimpse of the child's face. The world stopped. The baby had his eyes, not just the color but the shape, the way they seemed to take in everything with serious intensity. His hair was dark, almost black, with the same slight wave that Silas had inherited from his Portuguese grandfather. Even the shape of his tiny nose carried an unmistakable resemblance. Jesus Christ, Silas breathed, sinking into the armchair across from the couch. Carolina was swaying gently, her movements automatic and practiced. His name is Gabriel, she said softly. Gabriel Hayes. He's 15 days old. Gabriel. The name felt foreign on his tongue, but somehow right. Why that name? It means God is my strength. She looked down at the baby with a tenderness that made Silas's chest ache. I needed to believe in strength I didn't think I had. The baby's eyes opened and Silas found himself looking into a miniature version of his own gaze. Gabriel blinked slowly, his tiny mouth working soundlessly, and something shifted fundamentally in Silas's chest. All the anger, all the carefully constructed arguments about deception and choices seemed to evaporate in the face of this tiny person who carried half his DNA. He stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. Can I hold him? Can I touch him? Can I undo 8 months of absence? Carolina studied his face for a long moment, and he saw something in her expression that he couldn't quite identify. Wariness, yes, but also something that might have been hope. He just ate. He should be calm for a while. She moved closer and Silas caught the faint scent of her shampoo, still the same lavender she'd used throughout their marriage. Support his head. He's stronger than he looks, but still fragile. Silas reached out with hands that had signed million-dollar contracts without trembling, but now shook as Carolina carefully transferred their son into his arms. Gabriel was so much smaller than he'd expected, so warm and solid and undeniably real. The baby looked up at him with solemn dark eyes and Silas felt something crack open inside his chest, something he'd kept locked away since his own father's funeral 10 years ago. "Hello, Gabriel," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion he hadn't given himself permission to feel. Carolina watched from a careful distance, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold. "I know you're angry," she said quietly, "and you have every right to be, but please understand I was protecting him, and myself." Silas looked up from Gabriel's face to meet her eyes, and for the first time since walking through her door, he saw her not as the woman who had deceived him, but as the mother who had carried this child alone, who had made impossible choices with no good options. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "How long were you planning to keep this from me?" Carolina's composure finally cracked, and he saw tears she'd been holding back begin to spill over. "I don't know," she admitted. "I kept telling myself I'd figure it out later when I was stronger, when I could handle your reaction. But then days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and the longer I waited, the harder it became." Gabriel made a small sound, drawing both their attention back to him. His tiny hand had worked free of the blanket and was grasping at the air. Without thinking, Silas offered his finger, and Gabriel's grip closed around it with surprising strength. In that moment, holding his son for the first time while the woman he'd once loved more than his own ambition cried quietly across the room, Silas understood that everything he thought he knew about his life, about himself, about what mattered, was about to change forever. Silas stayed until Gabriel fell asleep again, which took 47 minutes. Not that he was counting. He found himself memorizing everything. The way his son's breathing created the tiniest movements in his chest, how his dark eyelashes cast shadows on his cheeks, the soft sound he made that was almost like a sigh when he finally surrendered to sleep. Transferring Gabriel back to Carolina's arms felt like giving up something he'd just discovered he needed. "I should go," he said, though every instinct screamed against leaving. "It's getting late, and you look exhausted." Carolina nodded, settling Gabriel back into his bassinet with movements that spoke of countless repetitions. "The first few weeks are intense. I'm still figuring out his rhythms." Silas watched her adjust the baby's blanket with practiced care, and the reality of what she'd been doing alone for over 2 weeks hit him like a physical blow. While he'd been attending board meetings and closing deals, she'd been learning to be a mother with no support system, no partner to share the overwhelming responsibility of keeping this tiny person alive and thriving. "Carolina," his voice caught slightly, "what you've been doing, raising him alone. I can't imagine how difficult." "Please don't." She cut him off gently, but firmly. "I don't need your pity, Silas. I made my choices based on what I thought was best for everyone involved. And what about now? What happens now that I know?" She was quiet for so long he wondered if she'd heard him. When she finally turned from the bassinet, her green eyes held a wariness that made his chest ache. "I don't know," she admitted. "I honestly never thought this far ahead. I was just trying to survive each day." Silas pulled out his phone, and after a moment's hesitation, handed it to her. Put your number in. The same one, or, I changed it after the divorce. She took the phone, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. I needed a fresh start. A fresh start that hadn't included him. The words stung more than they should have. When she handed his phone back, their fingers brushed briefly, and he felt the same electric jolt that had always existed between them. From her sharp intake of breath, he knew she'd felt it too. I'll call you tomorrow, he said, sliding the phone back into his jacket pocket. We need to talk about everything. Support, schedules, how this is going to work. Silas. Her voice stopped him at the door. I need you to understand something. If you're going to be part of his life, you're all in, or you're not in at all. I won't have Gabriel wondering why Daddy only shows up when it's convenient. The weight of her words settled around him like a challenge. All in. Silas Lockwood had built his fortune on calculated risks, on knowing exactly what he was getting into before he made any commitment. This was the opposite of everything he understood about control and planning. I understand, he said, though he wasn't sure he understood anything anymore. The drive back to his Manhattan penthouse passed in a blur of city lights and racing thoughts. Silas's reflection in the elevator mirrors looked like a stranger. Same expensive suit, same confident posture, but his eyes held something new, something unsettled. His apartment, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, felt cavernous and sterile after the warm chaos of Carolina's place. The silence was oppressive. He'd always prized quiet, had specifically chosen this building for its soundproofing, but now it felt like a tomb. He poured himself 3 fingers of Macallan and stood at the window, watching the city pulse with life 40 stories below. Somewhere in that maze of lights, Carolina was probably struggling with a 2 a.m. feeding, exhausted and alone while their son, demanded everything she had to give. The whiskey burned, but not as much as the knowledge that he'd spent 15 days of his child's life completely ignorant of his existence. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but one he now knew belonged to Carolina. Thank you for coming tonight. I know this is overwhelming. G is usually fussy around 3 a.m. if you want to call and hear him cry through the phone. Despite everything, Silas found himself almost smiling. Even in the middle of this emotional earthquake, Carolina was trying to inject levity into the situation. It was so typically her, finding humor in the darkest moments, offering connection even when she had every reason to build walls. He typed back, "Will you answer if I call?" Her response came quickly, "Probably. I don't sleep much these days anyway." At 3:17 a.m., his phone rang. Gabriel's cries filled the line before Carolina even said hello, the sound of pure infant outrage that somehow reached into Silas's chest and twisted something he didn't know was there. Right on schedule, Carolina's voice came through, slightly breathless. "He's got your punctuality." "What do you do?" Silas asked, settling into his leather chair. "When he cries like that?" "Everything," she laughed, but it sounded tired. "Check his diaper, try feeding him. Walk around the apartment singing off-key lullabies. Sometimes he just needs to know someone's there." Silas could hear her moving around, the soft shush-shush sounds she was making to comfort Gabriel. "Are you walking with him now?" We're doing laps around the living room. I've probably walked 3 miles tonight just in this apartment." "Sing to him." "What?" "You said you sing to him. I want to hear." There was a pause, and Gabriel's cries softened slightly. Then, barely audible through the phone, came Carolina's voice singing a Portuguese lullaby Silas recognized from his childhood. His grandmother had sung the same song to him during the rare nights she'd babysat while his parents worked late. "Dorme, dorme, meu menino, dorme que vou trabalhar." Her pronunciation wasn't perfect, but the melody was hauntingly beautiful in her voice. Gabriel's cries gradually faded to soft hiccups, then to silence. "How do you know that song?" Silas's voice was rough with unexpected emotion. "You used to hum it sometimes when you were concentrating." I looked up the words. There was a pause. I thought maybe someday I'd want to remember something good about us." They stayed on the phone for another hour, mostly in comfortable silence, punctuated by Gabriel's occasional sounds and Carolina's gentle responses. Silas found himself listening not just to his son, but to the rhythm of Carolina's life, her soft footsteps, the creak of the rocking chair she must have bought for nursing, the quiet sounds of someone learning to be everything to someone else. "Carolina," he said finally, when Gabriel had been quiet for several minutes. "I want to help, really help. Not just write checks. I want to learn how to do what you're doing." Another long pause. "It's It's not easy, Silas. It's not something you can master with strategy and determination. Some nights I have no idea what I'm doing. Some days I cry as much as he does. Then let me not know what I'm doing with you. The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. He'd built his entire adult life around competence, around being the expert in every room he entered. The idea of deliberately entering territory where he would be fumbling and uncertain was terrifying and oddly liberating. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. "This is all so new, and I'm still figuring out how to protect him, how to protect myself, from me, from hoping for things that might not last." After they hung up, Silas sat in his chair until dawn broke over the Manhattan skyline, thinking about hope and protection, about the woman who'd once believed he could be more than he'd proven himself to be, and about the son who represented a chance at becoming someone he'd never imagined he could be. When his alarm went off at 6 a.m., he was already awake, already planning to do something he'd never done in 15 years of running his company, rearrange his entire schedule around something that had nothing to do with profit margins and everything to do with a 15-day-old boy who had inherited his eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. 3 days later, Silas stood outside Carolina's door at 7 a.m., holding 2 large coffee cups and a bag of fresh bagels from the bakery she'd always loved in their neighborhood. He'd canceled a breakfast meeting with potential investors from Singapore, a decision that would have been unthinkable a week ago. Carolina answered on the second knock, wearing the same oversized sweater from their first encounter but with different leggings, her auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail that had seen better days. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, but she managed a small smile when she saw the coffee. "You remembered my order," she said, accepting the cup with both hands like it was a lifeline. "Oat milk latte, extra shot, no sugar. Some things don't change." He followed her inside, noting the subtle differences since his last visit. Baby clothes hung on a drying rack near the window, and the coffee table was scattered with thank you cards, probably from friends who'd sent gifts for Gabriel. "How was last night?" "Better, actually. He only woke up twice instead of every hour." Carolina settled into her corner of the couch, cradling the coffee. "I'm starting to think he was just testing me those first 2 weeks. Smart kid. Too smart. He definitely got that from you." They fell into an easy rhythm over the next hour. Gabriel woke up fussy, and Carolina showed Silas how to check his diaper, how to support his neck during changes, how to read the different pitches of his cries. Silas's hands, so steady when signing contracts worth millions, shook slightly as he fastened the tiny diaper tabs. "You're overthinking it," Carolina observed, watching him struggle with the baby's outfit. "He's not going to break. He's so small. He's actually big for his gestational age. 8 pounds 2 ounces at birth." Pride crept into her voice. "The doctor said he's developing beautifully." "You did this alone," Silas said quietly, finally managing to get Gabriel's arms through the sleeves of a soft blue onesie. "The whole pregnancy, the birth, everything." Carolina was quiet for a moment, her fingers trailing over Gabriel's dark hair. "Not completely alone. I had Dr. Martinez. She's wonderful. And Mrs. Chen from upstairs brought me groceries when I was too tired to shop. People were kind. But not the person who should have been there," Silas thought, the guilt sitting heavy in his chest. Gabriel began to fuss again, and Carolina moved to take him, but Silas held up a hand. "Let me try." He lifted Gabriel carefully, remembering how Carolina had shown him to support the head, and began the swaying motion he'd watched her do. Gabriel's cries softened to hiccups, then to silence as he settled against Silas's chest. "He likes you," Carolina said, and there was something in her voice. Surprise, maybe, or cautious hope. "He's probably just tired of your singing." That earned him a genuine laugh, the first real one he'd heard from her since their divorce. The sound hit him with unexpected force, reminding him of lazy Sunday mornings when making her laugh had been his favorite accomplishment. His phone buzzed, then again. Then began a steady stream of notifications that made Carolina raise an eyebrow. "I should probably—" He started to reach for it, then stopped. "Actually, no. Whatever it is can wait." Silas Lockwood ignoring his phone. "I never thought I'd see the day." "Yeah, well, things change." The phone continued buzzing insistently. Carolina glanced at it, then at Gabriel sleeping peacefully in Silas's arms. "You can check it. I know how important your work is. Not more important than this." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with everything they'd never been able to say during their marriage. Carolina looked away first, but not before he caught something vulnerable in her expression. "I should go," he said reluctantly when Gabriel had been asleep for 20 minutes. But I'd like to come back tomorrow if that's okay. What about your meetings? Your board calls? I'm learning to delegate. That afternoon, Silas sat in his office across from his assistant, Melissa, and his head of operations, watching their carefully controlled expressions as he outlined his new schedule requirements. So you want to block out mornings 3 days a week, indefinitely? Melissa's pen hovered over her planner. That's correct. For personal commitments? Yes. And the Yamamoto deal? The Tokyo trip next week? Postpone it. Send Jonathan instead. His head of operations, Robert, cleared his throat. Silas, with all due respect, the investors are expecting you personally. This deal could set us up for the next 5 years of expansion in Asia. Then it will wait until I can make it work with my other priorities. What other priorities? Robert's confusion was evident. This is completely unlike you. Silas looked out his window toward Brooklyn, where Carolina was probably preparing for another sleepless night with their son. I became a father, Robert. My priorities have shifted. The silence in the room was deafening. You became a father? Melissa's voice was carefully neutral, but he could see her mind racing through the implications for his calendar, his travel schedule, his entire way of life. 2.5 weeks ago, his name is Gabriel. Congratulations, Robert said slowly. I had no idea you were. Is there someone we should be sending flowers to? A partner we should know about? It's complicated. Silas stood, signaling the end of the discussion. Just make the schedule work, please. And Robert, clear my calendar for tomorrow afternoon. I want to research pediatricians in Brooklyn Heights. That evening, Silas found himself in territory he'd never imagined exploring. Online forums for new fathers. His laptop was open to tabs about infant sleep schedules, postpartum depression warning signs, and something called the 4th trimester that apparently applied to mothers after birth. He was deep into an article about bonding with newborns when his phone rang. Carolina's number. Is everything okay? He won't stop crying. Her voice was strained, barely audible over Gabriel's wails. It's been 2 hours, Silas. I've tried everything, and he just won't stop. I'm coming over. You don't have to. I'm already in the car. He made the drive in 22 minutes, taking corners with the precision of someone with a specific mission. Carolina met him at the door, Gabriel red-faced and screaming in her arms, her own face streaked with tears she'd clearly been trying to hide. I don't know what's wrong, she said, her voice breaking. He was fine this morning, and then he just started and won't stop. I'm a terrible mother. I can't even. Hey. Silas stepped inside and pulled the door closed behind him. You're not terrible, you're exhausted, give him to me. Carolina transferred Gabriel to his arms, and for a moment, the baby's cries intensified. Then gradually, they began to subside. Not stop completely, but soften to frustrated whimpers. How did you? Body temperature, maybe? I run warmer than you. Silas kept his voice low and steady, rocking gently. Or maybe he just needed a different voice. Carolina sank onto the couch, covering her face with her hands. I've been alone with him for 17 days straight. I love him more than anything, but I feel like I'm drowning. Silas sat beside her, Gabriel finally quiet against his chest. You don't have to be alone anymore. She looked up at him through her fingers, and he saw something crack in her carefully maintained composure. I'm scared, Silas. I'm scared of letting you in and having you leave again when it gets too hard. I'm scared of Gabriel getting attached to someone who might decide fatherhood doesn't fit into his life plan. I'm scared too, he admitted. I'm terrified I'll be as absent as my father was, or that I'll prioritize work over what matters. But I'm more scared of missing any more of his life. Gabriel made a soft sound, his tiny fist curling around Silas's finger. In that moment, with Carolina crying quietly beside him and his son finally at peace in his arms, Silas understood that some kinds of success couldn't be measured in quarterly reports or stock prices. Stay tonight, Carolina whispered. Not like before. Just stay and help me figure out how to do this. Silas looked around the apartment that had once been their shared sanctuary, then at the woman who'd carried his child through 9 months of uncertainty, and at the baby who'd already changed everything he thought he knew about himself. I'll stay as long as you'll let me. Silas woke up on Carolina's couch at 5:47 a.m. to the sound of Gabriel's first stirrings of the day, not quite crying yet, but the soft grunts and movements that preceded his morning demands. His neck ached from the awkward angle against the throw pillow, but he'd slept better than he had in months. Carolina emerged from the bedroom in pajama pants and an old Princeton t-shirt he recognized as his own, her hair sleep-mussed, but her eyes more alert than they'd been in days. Good morning, she whispered, moving toward the bassinet. Thank you for staying. I actually got 4 consecutive hours of sleep. 4 hours counts as a victory. 4 hours counts as a miracle. She lifted Gabriel, who immediately began rooting against her shoulder. Someone's hungry. Silas watched as she settled into the rocking chair he'd noticed during his first visit, Gabriel latching on with the fierce determination of someone who knew exactly what he wanted. There was something about the quiet intimacy of the moment that made his chest tight, not with jealousy, but with a profound sense of having missed something irreplaceable. I can make coffee, he offered, standing to work the kinks out of his spine. That would be amazing. Everything's in the same place as before. As he moved around Carolina's kitchen, muscle memory took over. He found her favorite mug in the cabinet to the left of the stove, remembered she kept the oat milk on the door of the refrigerator, knew without looking that she'd have exactly 3 types of coffee beans in labeled containers near the espresso machine he'd bought her for Christmas 3 years ago. It was unsettling how easily he slipped back into the rhythms of their shared life, as if the divorce had been a temporary interruption, rather than what he'd convinced himself was a permanent ending. Silas? Carolina's voice carried a note of hesitation. There's something I need to tell you. Something I probably should have mentioned earlier. He paused in his coffee preparation, every instinct suddenly on alert. What is it? My sister called yesterday. Vivian. She adjusted Gabriel slightly, not meeting his eyes. She's flying in from Los Angeles tomorrow. She doesn't know about you being back in the picture. Vivian, Carolina's older sister, the successful entertainment lawyer who'd never hidden her disapproval of their relationship. She'd been vocal about her belief that Silas was too self-absorbed to make Carolina happy, and their divorce had only confirmed her worst suspicions. What does she know? Everything about the pregnancy and Gabriel. Nothing about you finding out. Carolina finally looked at him. She's been my main support system through all of this. She took time off work to come help when I was in my 3rd trimester, and she's planning to stay for a week to help me adjust. Silas continued making coffee, processing this information. You told your sister about Gabriel, but not me. That's not fair, and you know it. Do I? He turned to face her, and she could see the hurt he was trying to control. Help me understand the logic, Carolina. Your sister, who lives 3,000 miles away, gets to know about my son from the beginning, but I find out by accident 8 months later. Vivian didn't ask me to prioritize my career over starting a family, Carolina said quietly, but there was steel in her voice. She didn't tell me children were an inconvenience that didn't fit into her schedule. The words hit him like a physical blow, all the more painful because they were accurate. Gabriel made a soft sound, and Carolina's attention immediately shifted back to him, leaving Silas standing in the kitchen, feeling like an outsider in what should have been his family. His phone buzzed. A text from Melissa, emergency board meeting moved to 10 a.m. Yamamoto threatening to pull out if you don't personally address their concerns by Friday. For the first time in his career, Silas looked at an urgent business message and felt nothing but irritation. I have to go, he said, though everything in him wanted to stay and work through this new landmine. But we need to talk about how to handle your sister's visit. There's nothing to handle. You don't owe Vivian anything, and she doesn't get to dictate how we navigate this. And what exactly are we navigating, Carolina? Because I'm still not clear on what this is. She was quiet for a long moment, focused on Gabriel, who had finished nursing and was making the drowsy faces that preceded his morning nap. I don't know, she admitted finally. I'm making this up as I go along. The emergency board meeting was a disaster of epic proportions. Silas's attention kept drifting to his phone, wondering if Carolina needed help with Gabriel, if their conversation about her sister had left things in a worse place than before. When Yamamoto's representatives expressed concerns about his commitment to the expansion timeline, he found himself giving answers that were technically correct, but lacked his usual passionate conviction. Are you feeling all right? Robert asked afterward, following Silas to his office. You seemed, distracted. I'm fine. Because if there are personal issues affecting your performance, we should discuss contingency plans. Silas stopped walking and turned to face his head of operations. Contingency plans? Look, I know this father thing is new territory for you, but we can't afford to lose focus right now. The company has obligations to investors, employees, stakeholders. The company will be fine, Robert. Will it? Because you've canceled or postponed 3 major meetings this week, you're blocking out random hours for personal appointments, and today you looked like you'd rather be anywhere else. The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to be dangerous. Silas had spent 15 years building his reputation on total dedication, on being the person who never let personal concerns interfere with business objectives. Now, for the first time, something else was competing for his attention. "I'm still the same person who built this company from nothing," he said carefully. "1 week of adjustment doesn't erase 15 years of results. I hope you're right. Because if Yamamoto walks, we're looking at a potential 20% revenue drop for next quarter." After Robert left, Silas stood at his window overlooking the city, thinking about priorities and obligations, about the weight of other people's expectations versus the pull of something he was only beginning to understand. His phone rang. "Carolina, is this a bad time?" "Never." The word came out before he could think about it. "Gabriel's been fussy all afternoon and I think he might be getting sick. His temperature is slightly elevated and he's not eating as much as usual." There was worry in her voice, the kind of parental anxiety he was beginning to recognize. "I called the pediatrician but they can't see us until tomorrow. What can I do?" "Nothing, probably. I wanted someone to know, in case I'm overreacting or underreacting. I don't have experience with sick babies. I'm coming over." "Silas, you don't have to. I'm already leaving." He hung up and grabbed his jacket, pausing only to tell Melissa he was done for the day. As the elevator descended toward the parking garage, he caught his reflection in the polished doors and realized he looked different somehow, less sharp around the edges, more human. The drive to Brooklyn Heights felt longer than usual, every red light an unnecessary delay between him and his family. His family. When had he started thinking of them that way? Carolina was pacing the living room when he arrived, Gabriel against her shoulder, both of them looking slightly frazzled. "How is he?" "Still warm, but not dangerously so. I think I was panicking." She transferred Gabriel to his arms and Silas immediately felt the subtle change in the baby's temperature. "He does feel warm. Have you given him anything?" "The pediatrician said to monitor him and call if it gets worse. But it's so hard to know what's normal and what isn't." They spent the evening taking turns holding Gabriel, monitoring his temperature, and consulting the stack of parenting books Carolina had accumulated. As the hours passed, Gabriel's fever broke, and he returned to his normal pattern of eating and sleeping. "False alarm," Carolina said with relief as Gabriel settled into what looked like a peaceful sleep around 10 p.m. Better safe than sorry. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the day's tension still lingering between them. Finally, Carolina spoke. "I know you're angry about Vivian knowing before you did." "I'm hurt," Silas corrected. "There's a difference. I needed someone, Silas. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified and alone, and she was the only person I trusted not to judge me for the choices I'd made. And you couldn't trust me with that?" Carolina looked at him with something that might have been pity. "You just asked for a divorce because you thought I wanted too much from you. How was I supposed to tell you I was carrying your child?" The question hung between them, unanswerable and damning. Silas knew she was right, knew that the man he'd been 8 months ago would have seen a pregnancy as confirmation that she was trying to trap him into a life he didn't want. "I would have done the right thing," he said finally. "The right thing according to who? Your sense of obligation, your lawyers, your PR team?" Carolina shook her head. "I didn't want Gabriel to be someone's obligation, Silas. I wanted him to be someone's choice. And now?" She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. "Now I think maybe you're choosing differently than I expected, but I'm still scared of what happens when the novelty wears off, when being a father becomes another item on your endless to-do list." Before he could respond, Gabriel stirred in his bassinet, making the small sounds that usually preceded a crying session. But instead of escalating, he settled back into sleep, as if reassured by the sound of their voices. "He likes having you here," Carolina observed. "Maybe he just likes having backup when you're stressed." "Maybe." She smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her all day. "Your sister's going to hate this, isn't she?" "Probably. But Vivian doesn't get to make decisions for us." "Us." The word slipped out so naturally that neither of them commented on it, but it hung in the air like a promise neither was ready to examine too closely. Vivian Hayes arrived like a small hurricane on Saturday morning, her stiletto heels clicking against the hardwood floors of Carolina's apartment with the precision of a metronome. At 34, she carried herself with the confident authority of someone who commanded respect in boardrooms filled with men twice her age. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, and her tailored black pantsuit screamed expensive even to Silas's trained eye. She stopped short when she saw him sitting on the couch, holding Gabriel against his chest while Carolina showered. "Well, well," Vivian said, setting down her leather weekender bag with deliberate control. "This is unexpected." "Vivian." Silas stood carefully, mindful of the sleeping baby in his arms. "It's good to see you." "Is it?" Her blue eyes, so similar to Carolina's but harder around the edges, assessed him with the same intensity she probably used to evaluate hostile witnesses. "Because the last time we spoke you were explaining to my sister why marriage was a business partnership that had run its course." Gabriel stirred at the sound of raised voices, and Silas automatically began the gentle swaying motion he'd learned over the past week. The gesture wasn't lost on Vivian, whose expression shifted slightly from outright hostility to cautious curiosity. "He's beautiful," she said, her voice softening despite herself. "He looks just like you did as a baby. You remember what I looked like as a baby? Carolina showed me pictures once, when she was still foolish enough to think you might want a family someday." The words hit their mark, but before Silas could respond, Carolina emerged from the bedroom, her hair still damp, wearing jeans and a soft purple sweater that brought out the green in her eyes. "Viv," she crossed to her sister, embracing her carefully to avoid disturbing Gabriel. "I'm so glad you're here." "Of course I'm here, though apparently there have been some developments you failed to mention in our phone calls." Carolina glanced at Silas and he could see her weighing her words. "It's complicated. I'm sure it is." Vivian removed her jacket, revealing a silk blouse that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Why don't you start with how long this has been going on?" 5 days, Silas answered before Carolina could speak. "I found out about Gabriel 5 days ago." Vivian's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "You didn't know? For 3 weeks you didn't know you had a son? For 8 months I didn't know." The silence that followed was deafening. Vivian looked from Silas to Carolina, her lawyer's mind clearly racing through the implications. "Carolina Isabel Hayes," she said finally, using the full name that meant Carolina was in serious trouble. "Are you telling me you've been a single mother for 3 weeks, struggling on your own while your child's father was completely unaware of his existence?" "It wasn't that simple." "It sounds exactly that simple. You had his baby and didn't tell him." Vivian's voice carried the kind of courtroom authority that made opposing counsel nervous. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking about protecting my son," Carolina said, her own temper beginning to flare. "And myself. By lying? By surviving." Gabriel began to fuss, picking up on the tension in the room. Silas bounced him gently, making soft shushing sounds that seemed to work better than they had any right to. "He's good with him," Vivian observed, almost reluctantly. "He's learning," Carolina said, accepting Gabriel from Silas's arms as the baby's fussing escalated toward real crying. "We both are." Vivian watched her sister settle into the familiar routine of checking diaper, offering food, finding the right position for comfort. "And what exactly is this?" she asked, gesturing between Silas and Carolina. "Are you back together? Co-parenting? What's the arrangement?" "We don't have an arrangement," Silas said. "We're figuring it out as we go." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer we have right now." Vivian studied him with the same intensity she probably brought to cross-examinations. "You know, I spent most of Carolina's marriage waiting for you to break her heart. When you finally did, I was almost relieved because at least the waiting was over." "Vivian," Carolina started. "No, let me finish." Her sister held up a hand. "I watched her make herself smaller to fit into your life. I watched her give up photography assignments because they conflicted with your schedule. I watched her stop talking about the things she wanted because you'd made it clear they weren't priorities." Each word was a precisely aimed arrow, and Silas felt them hit their marks. "You're right. Am I? Because if I'm right, then what are you doing here now? What's different?" Silas looked at Gabriel, now content in Carolina's arms, then at Carolina herself, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Everything," he said simply. "Everything is different." "That's not enough," Vivian said. "Different how? Different why? What happens when your board of directors decides they need you in Tokyo for 6 weeks? What happens when Gabriel gets sick in the middle of your biggest deal of the year? What happens when being a father stops feeling like an exciting new project and starts feeling like work?" The questions hung in the air like accusations, each one highlighting the uncertainty that had been gnawing at him since that first night. Silas realized that Vivian wasn't just being protective. She was voicing every fear Carolina had been too careful to express directly. "I don't know," he admitted. "I wish I could give you guarantees, but I can't. All I can tell you is that I want to be here. I want to learn how to be the father Gabriel deserves and the partner Carolina needed me to be before. Partner? Vivian's eyebrows rose again. Are we talking about romantic reconciliation or just co-parenting? We're talking about taking things one day at a time, Carolina interjected firmly, and not making any decisions based on pressure from well-meaning family members. I'm not well-meaning, Vivian said with a slight smile. I'm aggressively protective, there's a difference. Despite the tension, Silas found himself almost smiling. He'd forgotten how much Vivian's brutal honesty had occasionally amused him during their marriage, even when it was directed at his shortcomings. Fair enough, he said. For what it's worth, I'm glad Carolina has someone looking out for her interests. She's always needed someone to look out for her interests. She's too generous for her own good. Vivian's gaze softened as she looked at her sister. And too forgiving. Maybe, Carolina said. Or maybe I'm just tired of carrying anger around like a badge of honor. The comment was clearly directed at Vivian, who had the grace to look slightly chastened. Look, Silas said, checking his watch. I should probably give you two some time to catch up. I'll come by tomorrow morning if that's okay. Actually, Carolina said, shifting Gabriel to her shoulder. Why don't you stay for lunch? I was going to order from that Thai place Viv likes. And Gabriel's been sleeping better when there are more people around. Silas looked at Vivian, who was studying her sister's face with the intensity of someone reading between very important lines. If I'm not intruding, he said carefully. Oh, you're definitely intruding, Vivian said with a smile that was almost warm. But apparently that's what family does. The word family settled over the room like a tentative blessing, acknowledged but not yet fully claimed by any of them. Gabriel chose that moment to let out a perfectly timed burp that made all three adults laugh, breaking the last of the tension. Well, Vivian said, reaching for her purse, if we're doing this, I'm buying lunch. And wine. Definitely wine. I'm nursing, Carolina reminded her. The wine is for me. And possibly for him, she added, nodding toward Silas, depending on how many more uncomfortable questions I decide to ask. As Vivian pulled out her phone to place the food order, Silas caught Carolina's eye. She mouthed, "Thank you," at him, and he understood she wasn't just talking about staying for lunch. She was thanking him for submitting to Vivian's interrogation with grace, for not retreating when things got difficult. For the first time since Gabriel's existence had turned his world upside down, Silas felt like maybe he was getting something right. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of crisis that Silas had built his reputation on managing. At 6:47 a.m., while he was learning to prepare Gabriel's morning bottle with the precision Carolina had taught him, his phone exploded with calls from Tokyo, Singapore, and 3 different board members. The Yamamoto deal was collapsing. I have to take this, he told Carolina, who was sitting at the kitchen table with Gabriel on her lap, both of them still in pajamas. Vivian had returned to Los Angeles the day before, leaving behind a cautious approval and a promise to check in frequently. Lockwood, he answered, stepping into the hallway. Silas, thank God. Robert's voice was tight with stress. Yamamoto's pulling out. Completely. They're saying our lack of commitment to the timeline demonstrates fundamental incompatibility with their business philosophy. What timeline? We agreed to the December milestones, which require your personal presence in Tokyo next week, the week you said you couldn't travel. Silas closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of competing obligations. Through the thin walls, he could hear Gabriel beginning to fuss, and Carolina's soft voice trying to soothe him. Find an alternative. Send the full executive team. Offer video conferences. They want you, Silas, specifically you. It's about respect, about showing that this partnership matters enough for the CEO to be physically present. How long? Minimum 10 days. Possibly 12 if we want to salvage the subsidiary agreements. 10 to 12 days. Gabriel was barely 6 weeks old. Carolina was still exhausted, still learning, still struggling with the overwhelming reality of new motherhood, and he was being asked to disappear to the other side of the world for nearly 2 weeks. I'll call you back in an hour, he said, ending the call before Robert could protest. When he returned to the kitchen, Carolina was standing at the window, bouncing Gabriel with increasingly desperate movements while he wailed inconsolably. He won't eat, she said without turning around. He's been crying for 20 minutes, and nothing I do helps. Silas approached carefully, noting the rigid set of her shoulders, the way her voice carried an edge of panic she was trying to control. Let me try. She handed Gabriel over with hands that trembled slightly. The baby's cries didn't stop immediately, But they softened as Silas settled him against his chest and began the slow, rhythmic swaying that had become second nature. "You have the magic touch," Carolina said, but there was no humor in it. "He always calms down for you. It's not magic. He just knows you're stressed." "I'm not stressed, I'm fine." "Carolina." She finally turned to face him, and he saw the exhaustion that went beyond simple tiredness. Her eyes were rimmed with red, her complexion pale, and there was a brittleness to her smile that made his chest ache. "Okay, I'm a little stressed. It's normal. All new mothers go through this. When's the last time you left this apartment?" She blinked, clearly trying to remember. We went to the pediatrician last Thursday." "That's 5 days ago. Carolina, you need air, sunlight, time away from being responsible for another human being every second of every day. I can't leave him. What if something happens? What if he needs me? He needs you healthy and rested more than he needs you hovering." Gabriel had finally quieted in his arms, his dark eyes drooping toward sleep. Carolina watched them with an expression that was part relief, part resentment. "Your phone's been buzzing nonstop," she observed. "Emergency?" Silas hesitated. "Work stuff, nothing that can't wait." "Silas," her voice held a warning. "Don't lie to me. Not about work." He looked at Gabriel, now sleeping peacefully despite the chaos of the morning, then at Carolina, who was watching him with the careful attention she'd always paid to his moods when business pressures mounted. "Yamamoto is pulling out of the deal. They want me in Tokyo next week." "For how long?" 10 days. Maybe 2 weeks. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything they weren't saying. Carolina's face went through a series of micro-expressions: disappointment, anger, resignation, and finally, a kind of bitter understanding. "Of course they do. I'm not going." "Yes, you are." "Carolina, don't." She held up a hand, stopping him. "Don't make promises you can't keep. Don't pretend this is a choice when we both know it isn't. It is a choice. I'm choosing to stay." She laughed, but it was hollow. "For what? So you can resent us when your company loses millions? So you can blame Gabriel for derailing your career? So you can spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you'd put business first like you always do? That's not fair, isn't it?" She moved to the coffee maker, her movements sharp and efficient. Vivian asked what happens when being a father conflicts with being a CEO. "Congratulations, Silas. We're about to find out." Gabriel stirred in his arms, responding to the tension in the room. Silas bounced him gently, but his mind was racing through alternatives, contingencies, ways to be in 2 places at once. There has to be another solution. There is. "You go to Tokyo, handle your business and come back. I'll manage Gabriel while you're gone. You shouldn't have to manage alone. I've been managing alone for a month. I can manage for 2 more weeks." But even as she said it, Silas could see the cracks in her composure, the way her hands shook slightly as she measured coffee, the brittleness in her voice, the shadows under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights and too much responsibility carried without support. "What if I brought you with me?" Carolina paused in her coffee preparation. "To Tokyo? Why not? Gabriel's young enough that the travel wouldn't hurt him, and you could use a change of scenery." "Silas, I can barely handle him in my own apartment with all my supplies and familiar surroundings. You want me to manage a newborn in a foreign country while you're in meetings 14 hours a day?" She was right, and they both knew it. The idea had been desperate, unrealistic, born from his need to believe there was a solution that didn't require choosing between his son and his livelihood. His phone rang again. Robert's name flashed on the screen. "Answer it," Carolina said quietly. "Handle your crisis, I'll be fine." But as Silas looked at her, standing in her kitchen in wrinkled pajamas, holding herself together through sheer force of will while their son slept in his arms, he knew that fine was a luxury none of them could afford right now. "Lockwood," he answered the phone, never taking his eyes off Carolina's face. "Silas, we need an answer. Yamamoto's giving us until noon to confirm your travel plans, or they're walking permanently. Tell them I'll be there Sunday." Carolina's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly, but she didn't look surprised. She'd been expecting this outcome since the moment his phone started ringing. "Excellent. I'll have Melissa arrange flights and accommodations." "No." Silas shifted Gabriel to one arm, reaching for Carolina's hand with the other. She didn't pull away, but she didn't squeeze back either. "I'll handle my own arrangements. And Robert, this is the last time. After Tokyo, I want a new protocol for international travel. No more than 5 days away, no more than once per quarter." "Silas, that's not realistic given our expansion goals." "Then change the expansion goals. The protocol is non-negotiable." He hung up before Robert could argue, but the damage was already done. Carolina had pulled her hand free and was staring out the window at the autumn morning, her arms wrapped around herself like armor. 2 weeks, she said without turning around. 10 to 12 days, he corrected. And then I come home. This is home? The question hung between them, deceptively simple but loaded with everything they hadn't defined, everything they were still afraid to name. Yeah, Silas said, looking around the apartment that had once been theirs, that was slowly becoming theirs again in ways neither of them had anticipated. I think it is. Carolina finally turned to face him, and he saw tears she was trying not to let fall. Then why does it feel like you're already gone? The first call from Tokyo came at 3:47 a.m. New York time, just as Gabriel was settling back into sleep after his middle-of-the-night feeding. Carolina fumbled for her phone in the darkness, her heart racing with the particular panic that only new mothers knew, the terror that something was wrong with her baby. Silas? Her voice was thick with sleep and worry. I'm sorry. I know it's late there. I needed to hear your voice. She could hear the exhaustion in his words, the weight of time zones and business pressures and the distance between them. He'd been gone for 6 days, and already the rhythm they'd been building felt fragile, uncertain. How's the meeting going? Terrible. Yamamoto's team is treating this like a hostage negotiation. Every concession requires 3 hours of discussion and approval from Tokyo headquarters. He paused, and she could picture him running his hand through his hair the way he always did when frustrated. How's Gabriel? Fussy today. He seems to know you're gone. It wasn't entirely true. Gabriel had been fussy, but Carolina suspected it had more to do with her own anxiety than his father's absence. Babies, she was learning, were remarkably attuned to their caregiver's emotional state. And how are you? The question caught her off guard with its gentleness. During their marriage, Silas had often asked about her day, but it had usually been perfunctory, asked while checking emails or reviewing documents. This felt different, like he was really listening. Tired, but okay. Carolina. Really, I'm fine. Mrs. Chen brought soup yesterday and Vivian calls twice a day to check on us. That's not what I'm asking. She was quiet for a moment, listening to Gabriel's soft breathing from the bassinet beside her bed. Through the phone, she could hear the distant sounds of Tokyo at midday. Traffic, construction, the urban symphony of a city that never slept. I miss you, she admitted finally. I hate that I miss you, but I do. I miss you too. Both of you. How much longer? At least another week. Maybe more if they keep changing the terms. Carolina closed her eyes, fighting back the tears that seemed to come so easily these days. Postpartum hormones, she told herself, though she knew it was more complicated than that. I should let you get back to sleep, Silas said. Kiss Gabriel for me. I will. After he hung up, Carolina lay in the darkness for a long time, listening to her son breathe and trying not to think about how easily she'd slipped back into missing Silas Lockwood, how quickly she'd begun to depend on his presence, his help, his steady confidence in moments when she felt like she was drowning. By the second week, their phone calls had developed a routine. Silas would call during her evening, his early morning when Gabriel was usually having his fussiest period of the day. They'd talk through feeding schedules and sleep patterns, share stories about their respective days, maintain the illusion of shared parenting across 12 time zones. But the strain was showing. The deal's falling apart, Silas told her on Thursday night, his voice hollow with exhaustion. Yamamoto wants to restructure the entire partnership model. We might be looking at another few days of negotiations. Another few days? Carolina was walking laps around her living room, Gabriel crying inconsolably against her shoulder. Silas, it's been 8 days already. I can't. I need help. Real help, not just phone calls. I know. I'm trying to find a way to cut this short. Are you? Because from here it sounds like you're doing exactly what you've always done, prioritizing business over everything else. The words came out harsher than she'd intended, fueled by 8 days of single parenting and the growing certainty that nothing had really changed between them. That's not fair, Carolina. Isn't it? You said 10 to 12 days maximum. It's been 8 days, and now you're talking about extending further. The deal is worth $40 million. And Gabriel is worth what exactly? What's your son worth on your balance sheet, Silas? The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Gabriel's cries intensified, as if he could sense the tension even through her attempt to keep her voice level. I'm coming home, Silas said finally. No, you're not. You're going to stay and close your deal because that's who you are. That's who you've always been. Carolina, listen to me. I have to go. Gabriel needs me. She hung up before he could respond, immediately regretting the harshness of her words but unable to take them back. Gabriel was screaming now, his face red with infant rage, and she felt her own composure cracking. "I'm sorry," she whispered to him, settling into the rocking chair. "Mommy's just tired, and scared, and angry at your daddy for being exactly who I knew he was." The next morning brought an unexpected knock at her door. Carolina opened it to find a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying brown hair, pulled back in a neat bun. "Ms. Hayes? I'm Margaret Riley. Mr. Lockwood hired me to help with the baby." Carolina stared at her, Gabriel fussing in her arms. "He hired you? I'm a postpartum doula. I specialize in supporting new mothers during the transition period." Margaret held up a bag that clearly contained baby supplies. "Mr. Lockwood was very specific about your needs. He said you've been managing alone and could use some experienced help. I didn't ask for help." "No, but your partner did. And from what I can see, you need it." Carolina looked down at herself. Wrinkled clothes, unwashed hair, the kind of exhaustion that went bone deep. Gabriel chose that moment to let out a particularly pitiful wail. "May I?" Margaret held out her arms, and Carolina found herself handing over her son before she'd consciously decided to trust this stranger. Gabriel's cries softened almost immediately. Margaret bounced him with the easy confidence of someone who'd soothed thousands of babies, her movements economical and effective. "Better?" she murmured to Gabriel, then looked at Carolina. "When's the last time you had a proper meal? Or a shower longer than 5 minutes?" I don't remember." "Right. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to watch Gabriel while you take a long hot shower. Then you're going to eat something that doesn't come from a can or a delivery bag. Then you're going to sleep for 4 consecutive hours while I handle baby duty. I can't just leave him with a stranger. I'm not a stranger. I'm a professional with 15 years of experience and references from over 200 families." Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "Your partner flew me here from Chicago because he's worried about you. Because he loves you both and wants to make sure you're taken care of while he handles his business obligations." The phrase business obligations stung, but Carolina was too tired to argue, and Gabriel was completely calm in Margaret's arms, looking up at her with the serious expression he usually reserved for studying interesting ceiling patterns. 4 hours? Carolina asked tentatively. 4 hours minimum. Go shower. I'll be here when you get out. The shower was a revelation. Hot water, solitude, time to think without the constant background soundtrack of Gabriel's needs. When she emerged, she could hear Margaret talking softly to Gabriel in the living room, her voice carrying the easy rhythm of someone comfortable with infant conversation. Carolina found them on the couch, Gabriel wide awake and alert, Margaret reading to him from a book of nursery rhymes as if he could understand every word. "He likes stories," Margaret observed without looking up. "Very attentive for his age. He gets that from his father. Silas has always been able to focus intensely on whatever interests him." "And what interests Mr. Lockwood these days?" Carolina settled into the chair across from them, feeling more human than she had in days. "I thought it was Gabriel and me, but this week has reminded me that business will always come first." Margaret looked at her with the knowing expression of someone who'd seen this dynamic play out many times before. "He hired me at 2 a.m. Tokyo time, woke up a placement agency, paid premium rates for immediate service, and had me on a plane within 6 hours. That doesn't sound like someone putting business first. He's guilty. There's a difference." "Is there?" Because the man I spoke to sounded like someone desperate to take care of his family from 3,000 miles away. Before Carolina could respond, her phone rang. Silas's name flashed on the screen. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello. How's Margaret? Is she helping?" Yes, she's wonderful, thank you. You sound better. I had a shower, and 4 hours of sleep. Luxury beyond measure." "Carolina, about last night. You don't have to explain. I know how important the deal is." "No, you don't understand. I'm at the airport. I'm coming home." She felt her heart skip. "What about Yamamoto?" "I sent Robert and the full team to finish negotiations. The deal will either close without me or it won't. But I'm not missing another day of Gabriel's life for a contract signature." Carolina looked at Margaret, who was pretending not to listen while continuing to read nursery rhymes to Gabriel. "Silas, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. You were right. I am who I've always been. But maybe it's time to decide who I want to be instead." Through the phone, she could hear airport announcements, the bustle of travelers heading to destinations around the world. And in the middle of it all, Silas Lockwood was choosing to come home. "What time does your flight land?" "Tomorrow morning. Early. We'll be here." Both of you? Carolina looked at Gabriel, now sleeping peacefully in Margaret's experienced arms, and felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but hope. The dangerous, fragile kind of hope she'd been trying not to feel. Both of us, she confirmed. Carolina, I love you. I've never stopped loving you. The words hung in the air between them across continents and time zones, carrying the weight of everything they'd lost and everything they might still have a chance to rebuild. I love you too, she whispered. Come home, Silas. Just come home. Silas arrived at Carolina's door at 6:23 a.m. with 3 days of stubble, wrinkled clothes, and eyes that carried the exhaustion of someone who'd spent 14 hours on airplanes thinking about everything he'd almost lost. Carolina opened the door in her robe, Gabriel against her shoulder, both of them backlit by the soft morning light filtering through the apartment windows. For a moment, they just looked at each other, two people who'd been married for 5 years, divorced for 8 months, and parents together for exactly 5 weeks. You look terrible, Carolina said softly, but there was warmth in her voice. You look beautiful. She did. Even exhausted, even in her ratty bathrobe with her hair in a messy bun, she looked like everything he'd been trying to get back to for the past 2 weeks. Come in, she said, stepping aside. Gabriel's been waiting for you. Silas dropped his luggage in the entryway and moved directly to his son, who was making the soft grunting sounds that usually preceded a demand for breakfast. The moment Gabriel saw him, his dark eyes widened with what Silas chose to interpret as recognition. Hey, buddy, he whispered, taking Gabriel from Carolina's arms. I missed you. Gabriel studied his face with serious intensity, one tiny hand working free of his blanket to grab at Silas's nose. The gesture was so perfectly normal, so beautifully ordinary, that Silas felt his throat tighten with emotion. How did it end? Carolina asked, leading him toward the kitchen. The deal? I don't know yet. Robert's handling the final negotiations. Silas settled into a chair, Gabriel comfortable against his chest. Honestly, I don't care anymore. Silas Lockwood doesn't care about a $40 million deal? Silas Lockwood doesn't care about anything that keeps him away from his family. The word family hung between them, acknowledged but still fragile. Carolina busied herself making coffee, her movements careful and deliberate. Margaret had to leave yesterday, she said, but she left detailed notes about Gabriel's feeding schedule and some techniques for when he gets fussy. How are you feeling? Really? Carolina paused in her coffee preparation, considering the question. Better. Those 4 hours of sleep made a difference, and having someone tell me I wasn't completely incompetent as a mother helped too. You're not incompetent. You're amazing. I don't feel amazing. I feel like I'm making it up as I go along and hoping Gabriel doesn't notice. That's called parenting, according to every book I read on the plane. Carolina turned to look at him surprised. You read parenting books? 3 of them, plus downloaded podcasts about postpartum support and infant development. He adjusted Gabriel slightly, the baby now completely relaxed in his arms. I figured if I was going to be a father, I should probably learn how to do it properly. Something shifted in Carolina's expression, a softening around her eyes, a relaxation in her shoulders that suggested she was allowing herself to hope again. And what did you learn? That I don't know anything, that every baby is different, that the first few months are basically survival mode for everyone involved. He looked down at Gabriel, who was drifting toward sleep, and that presence matters more than perfection. Carolina poured coffee into 2 mugs, adding oat milk to his without asking how he wanted it. After 2 weeks apart, the small gesture of remembered preference felt significant. There's something I need to tell you, she said, settling into the chair across from him. About why I really didn't tell you about the pregnancy. Silas looked up from Gabriel's sleeping face, noting the careful way Carolina was holding herself, as if preparing to share something difficult. It wasn't just because you said children didn't fit your schedule, she continued. It was because of what happened after. After? The night you asked for the divorce. Do you remember what you said about children? Silas felt a chill of apprehension. The night he'd asked for the divorce was mostly a blur of anger and hurt and the terrible certainty that they wanted different things from life. Not specifically. You said that you dodged a bullet. That at least we hadn't made the mistake of having children together before we figured out we weren't compatible. Carolina's voice was steady, but he could see the pain in her eyes. You said you couldn't imagine anything worse than being tied to someone forever because of a child. The words hit him like a physical blow. He had no memory of saying them, but they sounded like something the man he'd been 8 months ago might have said in anger, in the cruel way people hurt each other when they're hurting themselves. Carolina, I was already pregnant when you said that. About 4 weeks along, though I didn't know it yet. I found out 2 weeks after our divorce was finalized. But when I did find out, all I could hear was your voice saying you couldn't imagine anything worse than being tied to me because of a child. Gabriel stirred in his arms, and Silas automatically began the gentle bouncing motion that had become second nature. But his mind was reeling with the implications of what Carolina had just revealed. So, you decided not to tell me. I decided to protect Gabriel from being seen as a mistake, from having a father who felt trapped by his existence. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug like it was an anchor. I know it wasn't fair to you. I know I took away your choice. But I couldn't bear the thought of you looking at him the way you looked at me that night, like we were obstacles to your real life. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything they'd never said, everything they'd been too hurt or too proud to acknowledge. Gabriel's breathing provided a soft counterpoint to the morning sounds of the city waking up outside. I would have changed my mind, Silas said finally. If you'd told me, I would have figured it out. Would you? Or would you have done the right thing out of obligation and resented us both? It was a fair question, and they both knew it. The man Silas had been 8 months ago probably would have done exactly that. Stepped up out of duty while viewing fatherhood as another responsibility to manage rather than a gift to embrace. I don't know, he admitted. I'd like to think I would have risen to the occasion, but honestly, you're probably right. I probably would have seen Gabriel as a complication to solve rather than a person to love. And now? Silas looked down at his son, who was sleeping with the complete trust that only babies possessed. One tiny hand was curled around Silas's finger, and his dark eyelashes cast shadows on his cheeks in the morning light. Now I can't imagine my life without him, without either of you. Carolina was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Robert called while you were in the air, she said finally. The Yamamoto deal closed. Apparently your team managed to negotiate better terms than originally proposed. Silas felt a flicker of professional pride, quickly followed by the realization that the news didn't create the surge of satisfaction he would have expected. 6 weeks ago, closing that deal would have been the highlight of his year. Now it felt like something that had happened to someone else. Good for them. $43 million, Robert said, plus subsidiary agreements worth another 15. Carolina, I don't care. I know, that's what scares me. What do you mean? She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the tree-lined street where they'd once planned to raise children together. What happens when the novelty wears off, when being a father becomes routine instead of miraculous? When you miss a big opportunity because you chose to stay home with us? Then I miss it. And you won't resent us? Silas stood carefully, Gabriel still sleeping in his arms, and moved to stand behind Carolina at the window. Can I tell you something? The whole time I was in Tokyo closing that deal, proving I was indispensable to the company, I felt empty, like I was going through the motions of a life that didn't fit anymore. She leaned back slightly, not quite touching him but close enough that he could smell her shampoo. But this feels right, he continued. Being here with you and Gabriel, learning how to be a family, this feels like the life I'm supposed to be living. Even when Gabriel cries for 3 hours straight, even when I'm too tired to have a coherent conversation, even when we disagree about everything from feeding schedules to financial planning. Especially then. Carolina turned to face him, and he saw tears she was trying not to let fall. I want to believe you. Then believe me. It's not that simple, Silas. Trust isn't something you can just decide to have again. Then let me earn it back, however long it takes. Gabriel chose that moment to wake up with a soft sound of protest, his internal clock apparently informing him that breakfast was overdue. Carolina reached for him automatically, and for a moment their hands touched as they transferred the baby between them. He's going to be hungry, she said. I'll make his bottle while you get him changed. They moved through the morning routine with the easy coordination of people learning to be partners again, careful not to acknowledge how natural it felt, how right. Later, after Gabriel had been fed and was enjoying his brief period of alert contentment, Carolina finally asked the question that had been hanging between them since Silas walked through the door. So what happens now? Between us, I mean. Silas looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the hope and fear warring in her green eyes, the way she held herself like someone prepared for disappointment, but unable to stop hoping for something better. Now we figure it out, he said. One day at a time, one feeding, one diaper change, one sleepless night at a time. We figure out how to be the family Gabriel deserves. And if we can't, if we're too broken to fix, then we keep trying anyway. Because giving up isn't an option anymore. Gabriel made a small sound, drawing both their attention, and when they looked down at him, he was staring up at them with those serious dark eyes that seemed to take in everything. I think he approves, Carolina said softly. Smart kid. He knows a good deal when he sees one. For the first time since Silas had returned, Carolina smiled. Really smiled. The kind that reached her eyes and reminded him of all the reasons he'd fallen in love with her in the first place. Welcome home, she said. And finally, for the first time in 8 months, Silas felt like he actually was. 6 weeks later, on a crisp December morning that painted Brooklyn Heights in shades of gold and amber, Silas received the phone call that would define the rest of his life. He was sitting on Carolina's couch. Their couch now, he'd started thinking of it, with Gabriel sleeping across his chest while Carolina showered. The baby had grown substantially in the 3.5 months since Silas had first held him, his features becoming more defined, his personality emerging in ways that fascinated and terrified his parents in equal measure. Lockwood, he answered, keeping his voice low. Silas, it's Richard Steinberg. Silas straightened slightly, careful not to disturb Gabriel. Richard Steinberg was the CEO of Meridian Global, one of the largest sustainable energy conglomerates in the world. They'd been trying to acquire Silas's company for 3 years. Richard, this is unexpected. I'll cut straight to the point. The board has authorized me to make you an offer. We want to buy Lockwood Energy. All of it. The number Richard quoted made Silas's breath catch. It was more than he'd ever imagined his company was worth, enough to secure his family's future for generations, enough to never worry about quarterly reports or board meetings or international deals that took him away from the people who mattered. That's substantial, he managed. It is. But there are conditions. We want you to stay on as division president for 5 years minimum. The transition would require significant travel, probably 60% international for the first 2 years while we integrate operations. 60% international. Gabriel stirred against his chest, making the soft sounds that usually preceded waking up. In 3.5 months, this child had become the center of Silas's universe in ways he'd never anticipated. The thought of missing 60% of Gabriel's first years felt like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed. When do you need an answer? End of business Friday. The offer expires then, permanently. Silas, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You'd be heading up our entire North American renewable division. The impact you could have on sustainable energy policy, on climate change initiatives, it's everything you've worked toward. After Richard hung up, Silas sat in the quiet apartment, Gabriel warm and trusting against his chest, and tried to process what had just happened. The offer was everything he'd dreamed of when he'd started his company 15 years ago. It was validation, security, the chance to change the world on a scale he'd never imagined possible. It was also 3 years of missing bedtimes and first words, and the 1,000 small moments that made up a childhood. Carolina emerged from the bedroom, her hair still damp, wearing jeans and the green sweater that brought out her eyes. She looked healthier than she had in months, the shadows under her eyes finally fading, her smile coming more easily. Who was on the phone? She asked, settling beside him on the couch. Richard Steinberg, from Meridian Global. Her expression shifted, becoming more alert. The acquisition people? They made an offer. And? Silas told her about the call, watching her face carefully as he outlined the terms, the timeline, the travel requirements. She listened without interrupting, her photographer's eyes taking in details he wasn't sure he was ready to share. It's a good offer, she said finally. It's an incredible offer. But it means being away more than I'm home, missing Gabriel's first years, missing you. Carolina was quiet for a long moment, her fingers trailing over Gabriel's dark hair. This is what you've always wanted, isn't it? The chance to have real impact, to build something bigger than yourself? I thought it was. And now? Silas looked down at Gabriel, who had woken up and was staring at him with those serious dark eyes that seemed to hold entire conversations. Now I think maybe I've been chasing the wrong things. Silas. Carolina's voice carried a warning. Don't make this decision based on guilt or some romantic notion of family life. Don't turn down the opportunity of a lifetime because you think it's what I want to hear. What do you want to hear? She was quiet for so long that Gabriel began to fuss, picking up on the tension between his parents. Carolina lifted him from Silas's arms, settling him against her shoulder with the practiced ease that still amazed Silas. I want to hear what you really want, she said finally. Not what you think you should want. Not what you think I want you to want. What you actually want for your life. It was the question Silas had been avoiding for weeks, maybe for years. What did he want? Not what he'd been trained to want, not what success was supposed to look like, but what would actually make him happy. I want to be here when Gabriel takes his first steps, he said slowly. I want to teach him to ride a bike and help him with homework and embarrass him at his high school graduation. I want to wake up next to you every morning and figure out how to be married to someone I'm still crazy about after all these years. Tears were sliding down Carolina's cheeks, but she was smiling. And the company? The impact you could have? I can have impact in other ways. Smaller scale maybe, but more personal, more sustainable. He reached over to touch Gabriel's tiny hand, which immediately curled around his finger. Besides, I think raising this kid might be the most important thing I ever do. The board will think you've lost your mind. The board can think whatever they want. I'm the majority shareholder. And when you're 55 and wondering what might have been, Silas stood and moved to the window, looking out at the street where children were walking to school with their parents, where couples pushed strollers and joggers ran past coffee shops full of people starting their ordinary, extraordinary days. You know what I wondered about in Tokyo, he said without turning around. I wondered what Gabriel's laugh sounded like. I wondered if you'd figured out that trick with the swaddle blanket that Margaret showed you. I wondered if you were okay, if you were happy, if you felt supported or abandoned. He turned back to face her, and the expression on her face made his chest tight with emotion. I don't want to wonder anymore, Carolina. I want to be here, living this life with you and Gabriel instead of managing it from hotel rooms and conference calls. What about the money? The security? We have enough. More than enough. He sat back down beside her, close enough to smell her lavender shampoo. Money can't buy back missed moments. Gabriel began to fuss again, the particular cry that meant he was hungry. Carolina stood to prepare his bottle, and Silas watched her move through the familiar routine, marveling at how naturally she'd adapted to motherhood, how fierce and gentle she was with their son. There's something else, he said as she settled back down with Gabriel. Something I've been thinking about. What? I want to marry you again. The words hung in the air between them, simple and complicated all at once. Carolina's hand stilled on Gabriel's back, her green eyes wide with surprise. Silas. Not because of Gabriel, although he's part of it. Not because it's the right thing to do or because people expect it, but because I love you. Because these past 2 months have reminded me of all the reasons I fell in love with you in the first place and all the reasons I want to spend the rest of my life proving I can be the husband you deserve. We're divorced. Legally. But sitting here with you and Gabriel, it doesn't feel like we're divorced. It feels like we're a family learning how to be better at loving each other. Carolina was crying now, the tears she'd been holding back for weeks finally spilling over. I'm scared, Silas. I'm scared of believing this is real, of trusting that you won't change your mind when things get hard. Things are going to get hard. Gabriel's going to get sick. We're going to fight about money and schedules and whose turn it is to change diapers at 3 a.m. I'm going to make mistakes, probably big ones. That's not exactly a compelling argument for remarriage. But I'm not going anywhere. Not to Tokyo. Not to board meetings that could wait. Not to chase opportunities that take me away from the two people who matter most. He reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. I choose this, Carolina. I choose us. I choose showing up every day and figuring it out as we go. Gabriel had finished his bottle and was making the drowsy faces that preceded his morning nap. Carolina stood to put him in his crib, and Silas followed, watching as she settled their son with the gentle efficiency that had become second nature. I need to call Richard back, he said as they stood looking down at Gabriel's sleeping form. To accept? To decline? Carolina turned to study his face, searching for uncertainty or regret. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. She was quiet for a moment, then reached for his hand. Okay, let's figure it out. All of it. The business, the future, us. She smiled, and it was the smile that had made him fall in love with her 7 years ago. But I want a different kind of wedding this time. Smaller. More about us. Less about what people expect. Whatever you want, and I want Gabriel to be part of it. Ring bearer or something appropriately adorable. He's 3 months old, Carolina. He can't even hold his head up reliably. Details. Silas pulled her closer, careful not to disturb Gabriel, and kissed her forehead. I love you. Both of you. More than any deal, any opportunity, any version of success that doesn't include you. I love you too, she whispered against his chest. Welcome home, Silas. For real this time. Through the nursery window, snow had begun to fall, dusting the neighborhood in white and promising the kind of winter afternoon that families spent inside, warm and together, building the ordinary moments that became the foundation of a lifetime. Silas Lockwood had spent 15 years chasing extraordinary success. Now, standing in a converted closet that served as his son's nursery, holding the woman he'd almost lost forever, he finally understood that the most extraordinary thing he could achieve was this: a family, a home, a love that chose presence over profit, connection over conquest. It was, he realized, the deal of a lifetime. 2 years later, the sound of Gabriel's laughter echoed through the backyard of their new house in Park Slope, a genuine belly laugh that could make strangers on the street stop and smile. At 2 years and 3 months, he had developed into a toddler with his father's intense curiosity and his mother's infectious joy, a combination that kept both parents simultaneously exhausted and enchanted. Carolina lowered her camera, having captured the perfect shot of Gabriel chasing soap bubbles while Silas knelt on the grass, blowing more as fast as his son could pop them. The afternoon light was golden, filtering through the maple tree they'd planted the day they'd moved in, a symbol of putting down roots, of choosing to grow something together rather than chase opportunities in distant places. "Daddy, more bubbles," Gabriel demanded, his vocabulary expanding daily in ways that continued to amaze them both. "Magic word?" Silas prompted, already reaching for the bubble solution. "Please, more bubbles, please." "Much better, buddy." Carolina smiled, watching them together. Silas had kept every promise he'd made in that snowy December 2 years ago. He'd restructured his company, focusing on local sustainable energy projects that rarely required travel beyond New York City. He'd missed exactly 3 bedtime stories in 24 months, and those had been for genuine emergencies. He'd learned to braid hair, in preparation for potential future daughters, mastered the art of toddler negotiation, and had somehow become the parent Gabriel ran to when he was hurt or scared. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. The first year of remarriage had tested them both in ways their younger selves hadn't been prepared for. Sleepless nights with a teething baby, disagreements about discipline and schedules, the delicate dance of learning to trust each other again while simultaneously learning to be parents. It had been beautiful and messy and real in ways their first marriage had never quite achieved. "Mama, look!" Gabriel had discovered that he could catch bubbles on his shirt without popping them, and was now wearing several iridescent spheres like temporary jewelry. "I see, baby. You're very clever. Like Daddy." "Just like Daddy," Carolina agreed, catching Silas's eye over their son's head. He grinned at her, that boyish smile that had made her fall in love with him 7 years ago, and again 2 years ago when he'd proposed for the second time on bended knee in Gabriel's nursery. Their second wedding had been everything their first hadn't been: intimate, joyful, focused on commitment rather than spectacle. Vivian had walked Carolina down the aisle while Silas's best man held Gabriel, who had managed to stay relatively calm throughout the ceremony, despite being dressed in a tiny tuxedo that made him look like the world's most adorable miniature businessman. The business world had initially reacted to Silas's decision with a mixture of shock and pity. Turning down the Meridian deal had been seen as professional suicide, a brilliant career derailed by misplaced priorities. But Lockwood Energy had thrived under his more selective leadership, and Silas had discovered that being known as a CEO who prioritized family had actually enhanced his reputation in unexpected ways. Young talent sought out his company specifically because of his work-life balance policies, and clients appreciated dealing with someone who understood that business was ultimately about people, not just profit. "Time for lunch," Carolina announced, gathering up Gabriel's toys while he protested the end of bubble time. "5 more minutes?" Gabriel tried, having learned this negotiation tactic from watching his parents discuss everything from bedtime to vacation plans. "How about we have lunch and then Daddy reads you a story?" Gabriel considered this compromise seriously, his dark eyes, so like his father's, weighing the options. "2 stories, 1 story, Silas countered, "but I'll do the voices." "Deal." They moved inside to the kitchen Carolina had fallen in love with the moment they'd toured the house. Spacious enough for family meals, but cozy enough for intimate conversations, with windows that let in natural light perfect for her photography. She'd returned to work part-time when Gabriel turned 18 months, specializing in family portraits for couples who wanted to capture the authentic moments rather than posed perfection. As they prepared lunch together, Gabriel, helping by arranging napkins on the table with toddler precision, Carolina felt the deep contentment that had become her baseline over the past 2 years. Not constant happiness, that would have been unrealistic, but a profound sense of being exactly where she belonged, with exactly the right people. "I have news," Silas said quietly, while Gabriel was distracted by trying to fold napkins into increasingly creative shapes. "Good news or bad news? Depends on your perspective. The Times wants to do a feature story on successful CEOs who've restructured their careers around family priorities. They want to interview us." Carolina raised an eyebrow. "Us?" "They're specifically interested in our story. The divorce, the baby, the remarriage, how we've made it work." Silas helped Gabriel with a particularly stubborn napkin. "I told them I'd discuss it with you first. What do you think?" "I think if our story can help other couples figure out how to prioritize what matters, maybe it's worth sharing." Carolina considered this, watching Gabriel carefully arrange silverware with the same focused intensity Silas brought to everything he cared about. "Okay, but I get to approve the final article before it runs. Deal. And we don't do any photos with fake smiles or staged moments." "Absolutely not. And Gabriel's privacy is protected. Non-negotiable." She kissed him then in the middle of their sun-filled kitchen while their son practiced his napkin folding technique, and marveled at how natural it felt to be planning a future together, to be making decisions as partners rather than adversaries. "There's something else," she said when they separated. "What?" Carolina reached into the pocket of her jeans and pulled out a small plastic stick, placing it on the counter where only Silas could see it. His eyes widened as he registered what he was looking at, then moved to her face with an expression of wonder and joy that made her heart race. "Are you serious? 8 weeks. I wanted to be sure before I told you. Gabriel's going to be a big brother. If you're okay with that. I know we haven't talked about having more children." Silas silenced her with a kiss that lasted long enough for Gabriel to notice and wrinkle his nose in toddler disgust. "You kissing," Gabriel pronounced with authority. "You'll understand when you're older, buddy," Silas said, lifting Gabriel onto his shoulders. "How do you feel about being a big brother?" "What's a big brother?" "It means you'll have a baby sister or brother to teach things to protect and help take care of." Gabriel considered this seriously. "Like how you take care of Mama and me?" "Exactly like that." "Okay, I can do that." Carolina laughed, photographing the moment with her eyes rather than her camera. Gabriel perched on Silas's shoulders, all three of them grinning in their imperfect, beautiful kitchen, planning for a future none of them could have imagined 2 years ago. That evening, after Gabriel had been read his promised story, with voices and tucked into his toddler bed, Silas and Carolina sat on their back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Do you ever regret it?" Carolina asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "The life you gave up? The opportunities you turned down?" Silas was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "Sometimes I wonder what might have been. But then Gabriel laughs, or you smile at me over coffee in the morning, or I watch you work in your darkroom, and I remember that I didn't give up a life. I chose one. Even when he throws tantrums in the grocery store? Especially then. Because even his tantrums are ours." A shooting star streaked across the darkening sky, and Carolina made a wish she didn't share aloud, that 20 years from now, they'd be sitting on this same porch, watching their children, plural now, navigate their own choices about love and work and what mattered most in life. "I love you," she said instead. "I love you too. All of you. All of us," she corrected, placing his hand on her still flat stomach where their second child was growing. Inside the house, Gabriel's voice drifted through the baby monitor as he talked himself to sleep, a stream of consciousness commentary on bubbles and napkins and the profound injustice of bedtimes. His parents smiled, listening to the soundtrack of their ordinary, extraordinary life. Silas Lockwood had once believed that success was measured in stock prices and market share, in recognition and expansion, and the accumulation of more. Now, sitting on his back porch with his wife's head on his shoulder, and his son's voice providing a gentle lullaby, he understood that he had achieved something far more valuable, a life built not on what he could acquire, but on what he chose to cherish. Some deals, he'd learned, were worth far more than money could measure. Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between career success and family happiness? What would you have done in Silas's position? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.